As we move into this next conversation, one of the things that we are inviting that we are doing in our own work as we think and plan for Presbytery Assembly, but also think about what does it mean to resource one another and to be together. A question that we are asking is, what do we need to cultivate in order to engage in this complex issue prophetically and humbly in our presbytery and our congregations? And so members of and collaborators with the Middle East Task Force are here to be in conversation with us today, facilitated by Reverend Beth Guzman and others. And so we invite you to listen in and participate in a deeply curious way in this conversation.
Good evening. I'm tasked today with providing a report back from this past summer's General Assembly vote upon the overture entitled "Confessing Our Complicity in Christian Zionism Today." As you know, in this presbytery, we are of one mind on many issues, and many of our votes are quite decisive. However, when we were charged with voting upon this overture in May's assembly, the vote was almost split, leaning slightly in favor of rejecting the overture. On a national level, it passed through enough presbyteries to be presented in front of the General Assembly for vote, and there it did pass. It is now an approved document backed by our official denomination of the PCUSA, which is why we wanted to bring this to you today. Our task today in this presentation is not to convince anyone to change their mind, as we're all well-educated adults here with our own experiences and perspectives, but simply to present some of the work that our colleagues have been doing in real time on this issue. In the hope of walking humbly, the planning team unfortunately wouldn't let me spout facts and definitions at you for 20 minutes, so there's a lot that we are going to leave out today, and you're welcome to join us later, maybe at dinner, if you have further conversations. But we felt that allowing real people to talk about their real, varied experiences would be more helpful. And we also would like to provide you with resources as well so that you may be able to speak eloquently on this topic with your churches. But before I launch into the details of our report, I would like to start out with a personal story. My grandfather, the Reverend Andrew J. Hofer, who was a PCUSA pastor from First Presbyterian Church in Audubon, Iowa, attended one of the 3 marches from Selma, Alabama, with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others during the Civil Rights Movement. So for context upon our conversation today, and to give a little historical perspective of how important the church has been on social justice issues, I would like to read an excerpt from his church's newsletter, The Presbytidings, from April of 1965. The issue is different, but the words still ring true to us today. My grandfather writes, "I feel it is highly important for every Christian today to understand the philosophy behind and the reasons for the civil rights nonviolent demonstrations, such as the March from Selma, and to know why the church has become so actively engaged in them. Without this understanding, we may be blown to and fro by the many conflicting reports that we read. We must reach down to the solid foundations which have been anchored in this movement. Otherwise, all the ornamental facts we scan may drive us first in one way and then another without any underlying support. I cannot help reflecting now, though, that it is too bad the church doesn't have a vital issue to consider every Sunday if it can secure this type of response and attendance. Apparently that Sunday was packed to the brims at First Presbyterian Church in Audubon." But he continues, "But maybe the church does have. Maybe we preachers have been asleep too long, or we've stayed away from vital issues too much. Maybe we have allowed the real things to happen out there without our active participation, remaining undetected, or at least undiscussed, while we have worried church members with such things as a doorbell fund for the Presbyterian manse." First, we must not suggest that the southern situation is wholly unlike the northern situation. Both areas have highly complex race relation problems. One man reflected this fact when he ironically said, "The whole thing is not a simple black and white problem." Yet, some blacks and some whites must emerge based both on facts and ideals, or there can be no progress toward a solution. There can only be dissipating conflict. And he concludes by saying, "There is much that we as Christians should understand about our church's involvement in this whole movement. Many points of view have been expressed, but unless we hear our church's position, we cannot hope to understand our church's position in regards to our civil rights concerns." These are very true words today for us in church in terms of the issue of Christian Zionism, which cannot be easy for any of us to speak about publicly. It is very fraught conversation, so let's give grace to our speakers today. You may hear something from one of our presenters that triggers you or makes you feel uncomfortable or anxious, or that you disagree with, and that's okay. This is normal in this kind of dialogue. What is important is that we all stay at the table. So some quick basic facts around the overture on Christian Zionism before we turn to our stories. The Presbyterian Church USA, here's one definition I will offer, has condemned Christian Zionism, which is a messianic ideology that views the takeover of Palestine as a biblical promise and as, this is the important part, a precursor to the second coming of Jesus Christ. The PCUSA argues that Christian Zionism links the state of Israel with biblical views of the promised land to justify taking land away from Palestinians. The second note is that this overture is a brief document, and alone it will not be able to answer your congregation's questions on Christian Zionism. There's currently a group working at the denominational level in collaboration with the World Communion of Reformed Churches partners in creating a study guide for us to use with our congregations. However, as is true with our denomination, good things take time. So we will need to be patient as the study guide is created. Number 3 is this overture did not start on or after October 7th, 2023. It started many years before, and it's an amendment to a 2004 resolution on rejecting Christian Zionism. So this overture is not a timely response to the increasing violence in the Middle East. It just happens to be a timely response to the increasing violence in the Middle East and gives us all something to talk about with our churches. Number 4, this overture was not written by folks in an ivory tower. It was written by folks who have been traveling to the area and working with people directly impacted in the region. It is not our attempt to tell folks in the Middle East how to behave or what to believe. On the contrary, it speaks to us as Christians and to our impact in the region as Christians, as American Christians. Number 5, Christian Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic. We as a denomination stand resolutely against anti-Semitism in all of its forms, particularly when it comes from inside the proverbial house. This is our playing field. This is Christianity, and we are all responsible for the theology that we promote, negate, or ignore. So turning over to our stories, unfortunately, our first storyteller today is not here with us, but I'm going to read a quick excerpt from a letter that he has written for you all today. And this is from Reverend David Black from First Presbyterian Church of Chicago. And he says, "Dear friends and colleagues, this morning I was arrested in a protest with dozens of Jewish activists. We took action against a manufacturing company which actively supplies and profits from the ongoing aggression of Israel against the people in Palestine. Our protest is grounded in our shared faith in the God of Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, Jacob, and all the ancestors. He says, today my conscience brought me into solidarity with dozens of Jews who are risking their bodies, their careers, and their safety to protest an American corporation profiteering from genocide. Tomorrow and for the rest of our lives, I hope to stand with many of you in facing down the immense evils that will confront us in the days and years to come. It is a fearsome thing to be Christian leaders in a time such as this. And we can provide and link the full. We don't have time to read all of it, but we can provide this to you if you'd like to read it. So our second speaker today is Reverend Beth Brown from Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church, who has to offer her experience about working in a very diverse, very old neighborhood of Chicago, Lincoln Park.
Yes, thank you, Beth. So just to be clear, I am not here as an expert today. I'm here as someone who has really been struggling with how to be in the midst of what's been going on, especially since October 7th of 2023 in Israel and Palestine. I'm one of the few Presbyterians I know who has never traveled to the region. I do not know what it looks like. I don't know what it smells like. I mean, obviously I've seen pictures like some of you have as well. I don't know people currently who are living in either one of those places. And so I don't have any firsthand knowledge to offer anywhere in all of this. And so I felt a little pressure early on to say something and to take a stand, because anybody who knows me knows that I am not afraid to take a stand. And I really felt inadequate to do that in some ways. Because I didn't have any firsthand knowledge, I don't have any firsthand relationships. I have relationships with many people who are Muslim and Palestinian in Chicago, and also who are Jewish, some who are Zionist, some who are not in Chicago. And so really was struggling with how to be in the midst of it. And I wanted to start my story by telling you that I was raised in a Presbyterian church, left the denomination over the ordination of women, ironically, but was taught in dispensationalism. And the rapture was a very big part of what I was taught growing up. And I was supposed to pray for it to come, every day. And I remember cheating and thinking, just let me turn 13 first, let me get my driver's license, let me go to college, all the things, and then you can come, right? And so it's been, like many of you, I've been on a lifelong journey to undo a lot of the things that I have learned. And what I want to say about dispensationalism is that it so feeds into Christian Zionism. And so as I was letting go and realizing like my whole idea of Scripture has changed so much, I remember, because I'm old enough to remember, when George W. Bush was president and decided to declare war on Iraq, I remember hearing that part of what influenced his foreign policy was Christian Zionism. And the idea that there was a homeland and that the Jews all had to return, because it wasn't until, the dispensation, the period of time, Christ wouldn't return until the Jews were back in that place. And then when Christ returned, too bad for the Jews. Anyway, I won't tell you the whole story of all of that, but I wanted to lift up that in in 2003, and then that whole period of time, for me, it was a little bit of a no-brainer in terms of Christian Zionism can't be a thing, because I also realize, like, it's, as you said, Beth, inherently anti-Semitic. And so, you know, I'm going to fast forward a lot of years because I'm old and so I've had a lot of life, but I'm grateful to this presbytery. I've been here in this presbytery for 11 years. We've done very concentrated, serious work around what it means to be anti-racist. And part of that work for me has been a commitment, a deep commitment to dismantling supremacies of all kinds. And I remember, what? 30 seconds. 30 seconds? Oh, brother. Okay. I am not a good short storyteller. My congregation will tell you. I was invited by a rabbi in Chicago to come and speak to emerging rabbis. And I was supposed to be speaking about justice work and how you do justice work. And so I was telling them about our justice work and how our commitment, our deep commitment as a congregation is to dismantle Christian supremacy. And then I went on to say a couple other things about justice. And I noticed that this group of young rabbis was very tearful, and some were visibly emotional. And I had no idea what I had said to upset them like that. And so I stopped at one point and I said, have I said something to offend you? And they said, we've never heard a Christian pastor name Christian supremacy. And that really was a light bulb for me in terms of the importance of being able to name the supremacies. And so I'm not going to have time to finish it all, but that ties into, you know, Zionism itself is built on supremacy. It is built on exclusivism. And so if we're going to be deeply committed to dismantling supremacies, I will say this for myself, it means for me that I am committed to being clear about the fact that I am not a Christian Zionist, and also to be clear about what Zionism has been built upon. Anyway, could go on forever about
Thank you,
other
Beth.
things.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And since we're running a little bit short on time, as we switch out our speakers up here, I'm going to have our next speaker come up. And I'm just going to add in here, if you were a part of the Middle East Task Force planning for this event and you're open to having company at dinner, could you raise your hand, please? So these are folks you can come to and talk to for questions. And then we also have books available for free for you and your congregation on the table out here. So please take one with you. So next and finally, do we have time? 2 minutes? For our last speaker, who is Reverend Joyce Smith from Presbyterian Church in Orland Park.
Can you hear me? This always makes me think I'm working at McDonald's.
Yeah. There you go.
There. Can you hear me? I always think I'm like working at McDonald's when I wear these things. So I have 2 minutes. Let me just say that my journey of transformation happened in 2008 regarding Palestine. So I went on a trip the first time to go over, I went with Wake Forest University, which is in North Carolina, and we went to see the Holy Land, the holy sites. And on that trip, we had an archaeologist, an anthropologist, and a religion professor. And though we weren't talking about politics, they did have us notice how settlements that the Israeli government had begun to build and how they were taking over Palestinian territory. That was an eye-opener for me. I didn't realize that. And Beth gave a good intro to what that's all about. So I've been to Palestine now 4 more times, and the last time I went was in February of 2024, and it was a powerful trip. We saw the devastation of, we couldn't go to Gaza, but we did see how the Israeli military was now encroaching on the West Bank, which is where Jesus walked, where Jesus lived. So I want to just tell you a story. My trip was facilitated by FASNA, which is a Christian organization advocacy for Palestinians. And also it was organized by Israel-Palestine Ministry Network, which is now Palestine Justice Network of the Presbyterian Church. So, like I said, we were there after Israel had bombed Gaza in retaliation of the bombing of a part of Israel. So now Israel military has killed over 140,000 people. It's much more than that, and 10,000 children. And in Israel, when the bomb was dropped there, it's 11,000. So you can see the discrepancy. So when we were there, tourism is a really big part of the Holy Land. And that has, as you can imagine, people don't go very often. Shops were closed, hotels were closed, the streets were silent most of the time. There were a lot more vendors in the street than I recalled because they had to support families. So we would, I bought a kerfer on a scarf from a vendor in the streets. So much of the Holy Land has become stagnant. They are hurting financially, as well as the death of their citizens. Okay, so here's my story. Our first visit was at a neighborhood where the Israeli military had come in and destroyed homes. And this story is about Fakhri Abdou Diab's story. He is a leader of a neighborhood. He has a wife and he has kids. And so when we got there, they wanted us to see firsthand how Israeli military had bombed his home. So we stood and listened to him in the midst of the rubbles of his home. And that had become common. That wasn't unusual to see a neighborhood totally destroyed. Fakhri is a leader in his community. He has children, I don't know how many kids, and a wife. And they were living in what was, after their home was demolished, they had tarps, plastic tarps, draped so that they could stay out of the weather. This was February and it was cold. So while we were there, this is a rock from his home. And we were invited to take a piece of the rock home with us to remind us of what was going on over there. And so I have this piece of rock by my bed, so I think about it every day. Anyway, he spoke to us, he had tears, his voice was emotional, and we haven't been able to forget him. So we came home, and a friend of mine who also went on the trip, she is Palestinian American and Orthodox Christian. Her mother is Palestinian and was there during Nakba. And she has family, aunt and uncle and cousins who live in Palestine who we were able to visit. And her uncle showed us where his land is being encroached on more and more by settlers, and where settlers had attacked their farm. So my friend had gone back over and led an olive picking trip and was able to visit with Fakhri again, and he had rebuilt his home. So that was a time for celebration for him. But then she returned, and a couple weeks after that, she got a phone call at 2 a.m. from his wife, who was crying that their home had been bombed again. So,
In 30 seconds.
so anyway, as a Christian, it is important for me to stand up for Palestine. I believe in walking humbly with God and being in relationship with people in Palestine, understanding my call to follow the ways of Jesus. It's imperative that we all pay attention and to speak out for people who walked on Jesus' land. So,
Thank you, Joy. And thank you on behalf of the Middle East Task Force for your time and attention.